The rain came down in cold, thin sheets, making the porch steps slick under my shoes. I stared at the name on the bank letter I held, the ink bleeding in the damp. Jareth. The name felt like a weight in my gut. My brother-in-law, my sister's husband, the man I had promised my sister I would protect. The voice on the other end of the line was cold, impatient. "Yeah, I wasn't expecting you. You should have known better." My knuckles were white as I clutched the phone. The paper in my other hand, the one that outlined the business loan I had signed for him, felt like a joke. Was this what a promise was? A cage? I found myself back in that old diner, the one with the cracked vinyl seats and the waitress named Wilma, who knew my order by heart. It was just a few months before I lost my sister Cassidy, and Jareth had called me out there on a Friday. He was a whirlwind of motion and big ideas, all wild gestures and half-formed plans. I sat across from him, sipping my black coffee, and trying to find the sense in his latest scheme. It was a custom car shop, a place where he could rebuild classics from the ground up, give them a new life. I was a retired mechanical engineer, and I saw the flaws in his numbers, the holes in his business plan a mile away. It was all passion and no practicality. I'd told him so a dozen times, but it never stuck. He was a dreamer, and I was a man of cold, hard facts. He was my brother-in-law, and he was my sister's entire world. A week later I sat in a hospital room, the sterile scent of disinfectant thick in the air. Cassidy's hands were thin and pale against the white sheets. She had always been the bridge between Jareth and me. She saw the good in him where I only saw the recklessness. Now, as the end drew near, her voice was a fragile whisper. "Oswin," she'd said, her eyes pleading with a kind of desperate love. "He's lost. He needs an anchor. Just help him. The shop, it's all he talks about. He wants to make something of himself." For me, the words hit me like a physical blow. I had always been her protector, her older brother. I had promised I'd always be there for her. How could I say no to her last request? The doctors had given her weeks, maybe a month. I knew I wouldn't be able to live with myself if I didn't do this for her, a final unsaid gift. The next day Jareth came to my home, a beat-up truck pulling up my tidy driveway. He was full of apologies for his past failures and a renewed sense of purpose. He sat on my porch, showing me new blueprints on his phone, detailing a marketing plan, and talking about how this time it was different. He'd learned his lesson. He pointed at the plans on his phone, his face lighting up as he talked about the paint, the engines, the new tools he'd need. He laid out a full plan and showed me how he could pay me back with a steady stream of revenue. I listened, my mind working through the numbers, the risks, the possibility of failure. But I wasn't listening with my head anymore. I was listening with my heart, the one that was aching for the sister who was fading away a few miles down the road. I wasn't just loaning money. I was buying my sister peace in her final days. The signing was a quiet affair. We sat at my kitchen table, the air thick with the unspoken gravity of the situation. I had already spoken with my bank and my financial advisor. The numbers were staggering, a significant portion of my life savings, but the advisor's words didn't matter. The weight of the promise was heavier than any ledger could hold. Jareth signed his name with a flourish, a look of pure, unrestrained gratitude on his face. He'd said he was going to make me proud, that he would make the shop a success. I signed my name below his, a cold sense of dread settling over me. I wasn't sure if it was for him or for me. I just hoped I was doing the right thing, that this was the right choice. My sister passed away 3 weeks later, and I buried her with the knowledge that I had done the only thing I could do. I had given her a reason to smile in her final days. For a few months it seemed like the risk had paid off. The shop, which he named Cassidy's Classics in her honor, opened with a small gathering of family and friends. Jareth was beaming, his face smudged with grease and happiness. He sent me pictures of the first car he'd finished, a rusted-out pickup truck that he'd transformed into a gleaming showpiece. I found myself smiling at the photos, a quiet, almost sad relief washing over me. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of a new chapter for him, a chance to get his life on track. I saw him at the funeral, his eyes red-rimmed and filled with a pain I knew only too well. He hugged me and told me he would never forget what I had done for him. I had made a promise to my sister, and he had made a promise to me. But promises, it seemed, were made of thin things. The phone calls started to change. He'd complain about a client, about the endless hours, about how the money was tighter than he expected. He was constantly asking for more money for equipment or for parts. The updates on the shop became less frequent, and the photos he sent me were just of the outside of the building, not the cars. I saw him less too. He'd cancel our lunch plans at the last minute, or he'd claim he was swamped with work. I saw the signs, the slow slide back into old habits, and the familiar panic started to bubble up in my gut. I had a bad feeling about what I was seeing and hearing from him. My sister was a shield that had hidden us from each other's problems. On the day before Christmas, I called him to confirm our plans. He had been so excited a few weeks ago, but now his voice was flat. "You should have known I wasn't expecting you," he'd said, a cold, hard edge to his voice. "I'm way too busy with the shop." I was taken aback. This wasn't the grateful man I had known. This was a stranger, angry and dismissive. I tried to reason with him, to remind him of the promise of what this all meant, but he cut me off. "You got what you wanted, Oswin. You're the big shot, the man who saved my life. What more do you want?" The line went silent and he hung up. I stood there, phone in hand, and for the first time the full weight of my sister's death and my sacrifice hit me. It wasn't a sacrifice, it was a debt, and Jareth didn't care. The phone clicked and the silence in my living room was deafening. I felt a cold knot form in the pit of my stomach. The words, so sharp and cutting, repeated in my head. "You should have known I wasn't expecting you." My hands were shaking. It wasn't just the rejection, but the utter disregard for the promise, for the memory of my sister. My whole body felt numb. I walked to the kitchen and stared out the window at the grey sky. He wasn't just ungrateful, he was angry, and the anger felt directed at me, at the sacrifice I had made, at a life I had given him. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong, and I wasn't just talking about the car business. I felt a profound sense of sadness. I had done what I thought was right for the memory of my sister, but I had a feeling that something was going on under the surface. The next day I drove to the little house he and Cassidy had shared. The grass was overgrown, and a broken porch swing hung from a rusty chain. I walked to the front door, the key I had made for Cassidy's emergency in my hand. I let myself in. The house was cold and dusty. It was a museum of her absence. I walked into the living room and my eyes fell on a framed photo of Cassidy and Jareth on their wedding day. She was radiant, her smile wide and full of hope. Jareth was beaming, his arm around her, his eyes filled with a pride that I hadn't seen in a long time. I reached out and touched her face in the photo, and the tears that had been threatening all day finally spilled over. She would have wanted me to forgive him, but I couldn't. I felt a sense of purpose building inside of me. I had to know what was going on. I had to know what I had done for my sister. I had to know if he was a good person who had fallen on hard times, or a bad one who had taken advantage of my kindness and love for my sister. I drove to the shop, the sign for Cassidy's Classics looking old and faded already. The front door was locked and the windows were grimy. I peered inside and saw a few cars in various states of disrepair, but the place wasn't buzzing with the sound of wrenches and the smell of fresh paint like he said it was. It was quiet and looked empty. I walked around the back and the back door was unlocked. I let myself in. The shop was a mess. Tools were scattered everywhere, and parts were piled in dusty corners. I saw a stack of bank statements and bills on a workbench, all past due, and then I saw it, a brand new expensive-looking sedan parked in the corner, a car that would have cost a fortune. I knew with a chilling certainty that this was not a company car, this was a sign of a deeper financial mess. The loan I had signed had been for tools and for parts. Where did the money for this car come from? I met with my lawyer at his office. The man was a friend, a kind-faced, tired man named Lowell, who'd handled my late sister's affairs. I explained everything to him, from the initial loan to the cold phone call. Lowell just listened, his face impassive. He laid out the grim reality. Jareth was legally bound to me. I had co-signed the business loan, so if he defaulted, I was responsible. The lawyer laid out the different legal options I had, and I saw that I had no recourse. The contract was clear. I was responsible for everything that Jareth had promised me he would do. The lawyer explained the legal ramifications of what I was trying to do. It would ruin him, but it would save me. The decision weighed on me, and I walked away with a profound sense of loss. I had traded a significant portion of my life savings for a lie. Back at my sister's house, I was cleaning out a cabinet, when a small, ornate wooden box fell to the floor. Inside, nestled amongst old photos and dried flowers, was her journal. I hadn't known she kept one. My hands trembled as I opened it. The first few pages were about her diagnosis, the pain, the fear. But then, the entries shifted. She wrote about her love for Jareth, her belief in his talent, and her hope that the shop would give him a new life. And then, the entries changed again. They were filled with a growing sense of worry. She wrote about his moods, his long hours away from the house, and the way he would snap at her when she asked about the business. Her words painted a picture of a man I didn't know, a man who was already slipping away. She wrote that she was worried that he was gambling with the money, and that he had been talking to other women. My heart ached with every word I read. I kept turning the pages, hoping to find some kind of comfort. Instead, I found a terrible confession. She had been the one to convince him to take my money, to make me a part of his life. She had hoped that the business would give him a new sense of purpose, but it had only made him more resentful. She wrote about his jealousy of my success, of the way he saw me as a constant reminder of his failures. He saw my offer to help as a handout, a favor that would forever make him indebted to me. The journal ended with a heartbreaking entry about how she was scared of what he would do. She wrote that she thought he was trying to ruin the business just so he wouldn't owe me anything. It wasn't about the money for him. It was about his pride. I sat there frozen, the journal in my hands. It wasn't just ingratitude. It was a deeper, more painful truth. He had never intended to make the shop a success. He had intended to use the money to live off of and then file for bankruptcy. The business had always been a means to an end. It was the way he had planned to get out of the shadow he felt I had cast over his life. It was a plan that had been born out of jealousy and resentment. I felt a profound sense of shame. I had been so focused on saving him that I hadn't seen the man my sister had seen. I had done what I thought was right for her memory, but I had made a terrible mistake. I had given him what he wanted, and he had taken it without a second thought. I had to know the full truth. I had to go and confront him. I drove to his house, the journal clutched in my hand. The porch light was off, and the house was dark. I walked to the door and knocked. I waited for a few minutes, but nobody answered. I tried the doorknob. It was unlocked. I walked in, and saw a flickering light in the living room. He was sitting in a chair in the dark, watching a flickering TV screen. He didn't even look up when I came in. The air was thick with a profound sadness. I walked into the room, and he looked at me with a look of pure contempt. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice flat. I held out the journal. He saw it and his eyes widened. The lie was over, and the truth was about to come out. The confrontation was quick and brutal. He didn't deny it. He didn't try to make up a story. He just sat there, the light from the TV flickering on his face, his eyes filled with a raw, ugly truth. He told me that he had never wanted to do the business in the first place, that it had been Cassidy's idea, and that he had only gone along with it because he was sick of her pleading with him to get his life together. He said he was sick of being in my shadow, of always being the one who needed a handout. He said that he had only taken the money because he knew it would be a way for him to finally get out of my debt. He confessed to using most of the loan to live off of for months, to pay for his new car, and to gamble with what was left. The words were like daggers, each one cutting deeper than the last. The man I had once thought of as family, as a good person, was a stranger. I stood there, the weight of his words pressing down on me. I saw it all now, the forced smiles, the lies, the excuses. I saw how my sister had been blind to his deceit, or maybe she wasn't blind, maybe she was just hoping that my sacrifice would save him. I saw how I had been a fool, a patsy, a man who had been taken advantage of because of his love for his sister. I had traded my life savings for a lie, and the cost was more than just money. It was the loss of a promise, the loss of trust, and the loss of a family I had once cherished. The anger that had been simmering inside me finally boiled over. I told him that I was going to cancel the loan. He stared at me in shock, his face paling as he finally realized what that meant. I wasn't just going to ruin him financially, I was going to ruin his future. I was going to expose him for the fraud he was, and I was going to do it for Cassidy. The next morning I went to the bank. The bank manager, a kind woman named Maribel, listened patiently as I explained everything. She was surprised but processed the cancellation without a word. I walked out of the bank feeling lighter, but also with a profound sense of emptiness. The money was gone. I had made the right decision, but it came at a terrible price. I had done what I had to do for Cassidy, but I had a feeling that I would be paying for it for the rest of my life. I went to her house, and I packed up the last of her things. I saw the empty space where she used to sit, the chair where she used to read, and I knew that I had done the right thing. The financial loss was nothing compared to the peace of mind that I was finally at peace with myself, and with my sister's memory. A few months passed. I had sold the house and moved to a smaller, more humble apartment. I had no contact with Jareth. I had moved on and I was finally at peace. One day I got a call from Lowell, my lawyer. He told me that Jareth had sold the business. He had found a new life, a new purpose. He wasn't living a life of luxury anymore. He was a simple, honest man now, working a regular job and living in a small rented house. He was happy. Lowell told me that Jareth had given him a message for me. He had written a letter. I took it and I went to my apartment. I sat on my balcony, and I opened the letter. Inside there was a single page, a simple, heartfelt apology. He wrote about his jealousy, his resentment, his fear. He wrote about how he had been a fool and how he had taken advantage of my kindness and love for my sister. He wrote that he had never expected me to cancel the loan, that he had thought I would just let him get away with it. He wrote that my decision had been a wake-up call for him, a moment of clarity that had forced him to finally take responsibility for his life. He ended the letter by saying that he knew he could never repay me, but he would always be grateful for the gift of a second chance. He signed it with a simple, honest signature. I read the letter, tears streaming down my face. I had done the right thing. I had lost a brother-in-law, but I had gained my peace of mind. I sat there on my balcony, the sun setting over the city, and I thought about the first time I met Jareth. He was so full of hope, so full of life. He was a dreamer, and I was a man of cold, hard facts. Now he was a man of cold, hard facts, and I was a man of hope. I looked at the contract in my hand. It was just a piece of paper. The real contract, the one I had with my sister, was fulfilled. I had done what I had to do, and I had a feeling that I would be at peace for the rest of my life. I was no longer a victim. I was a man who had done the right thing, and the financial loss was nothing compared to the peace of mind.